A teacher stealing food from a 3-year-old? Sounds insane, right? But what this father uncovered was even worse. It started as nothing, a small, passing thought. Caleb Adams didn't think much of it the first time his 3-year-old daughter, Mia, came home with an empty lunchbox. She was growing fast and kids got hungry, simple as that. Maybe she was just eating more than usual, but then it happened again, and again. Every afternoon, Mia would walk through the door, kick off her tiny sneakers, and set her lunchbox on the counter, empty, not a single crumb left. That wasn't like her. Caleb had always packed enough food, a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, apple slices, crackers, and a juice box. Even on her hungriest days, there'd usually be something left. At first, he brushed it off. Maybe the teachers let the kids share food, or maybe Mia was just developing a bigger appetite. But something felt off. It wasn't just the lunchbox. It was Mia herself. She was quieter than usual, less chatty, more tired. By the time evening rolled around, her usual excitement had faded, and she was asleep earlier than normal. Caleb figured she was just adjusting to the preschool routine, but something gnawed at him. One evening, as he helped her change into her pajamas, he casually asked, "Did you like your lunch today, baby?" Mia didn't answer right away. She was fiddling with the hem of her shirt, eyes focused on the cartoon characters on her socks. "Mia," Caleb tried again, keeping his voice light. That's when she shrugged and mumbled, "I didn't eat it." Caleb's brows pulled together. "You weren't hungry." She shook her head. "Mr. Johnson eats it." The words didn't make sense at first. He blinked. "What?" Mia still wouldn't meet his eyes. "He takes it." Caleb felt his stomach twist. His first instinct was to believe there had been some kind of misunderstanding. Maybe Mr. Johnson, her teacher, had taken a snack as a joke, or maybe Mia had given it to him on her own. Kids did weird things sometimes, but his gut told him this wasn't just a silly mix-up. "Every day?" he asked carefully. Mia nodded. Caleb felt his jaw tighten. This wasn't right. He had to find out what was going on. But first, he needed proof. Caleb barely slept that night. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying Mia's words over and over. Mr. Johnson eats it. It didn't make sense. Why would a grown man take food from a child, especially a teacher, someone meant to care for kids? Maybe Mia was mistaken. Maybe she was mixing up her words, but his gut told him otherwise. The next morning, Caleb watched his daughter as she ate her breakfast, her little legs swinging under the table. She was still her usual sweet self, humming softly between bites of toast, but something felt off. He had to get more out of her. He sat down across from her, keeping his voice calm. "Mia, baby, can you tell me more about Mr. Johnson and your lunch?" She chewed her toast slowly, thinking. "He says I don't need it all," she said simply, "that I'm little so I don't eat much." Caleb's grip on his coffee mug tightened. "Did you tell him you were hungry?" Mia nodded. "I did, but he said big people need it more." A strange, cold anger curled in Caleb's chest. He could feel his heartbeat in his ears. "Has he ever done anything else? Said anything mean? Touched you?" His voice was steady, but inside, he was bracing for the worst. Mia shook her head, her curls bouncing. "No, he just takes my food." Caleb let out a slow breath. That was something. At least she wasn't being physically hurt. But this was still wrong. He could march up to the school that second and demand answers. He wanted to. But if he did that without solid proof, they might brush him off, say it was a misunderstanding. He knew how these things worked. It would be his word against a well-respected teacher's. So he needed something they couldn't ignore. He leaned in closer. "Mia, tomorrow I'm going to pack your lunch like always, okay? But Daddy's going to put something special inside. It's a secret though, so don't tell anyone." Mia's face lit up. "Like a surprise?" Caleb forced a smile. "Yeah, baby. Just like that." He had no idea what he was about to uncover. But he knew one thing. Whatever was happening, it had to stop. Caleb woke up the next morning with a plan. He moved with purpose, packing Mia's lunch just like he always did. PB&J, apple slices, crackers, and a juice box. But this time, he added something extra. A small, hidden voice recorder. It was a cheap one he'd picked up years ago for work meetings, small enough to fit inside the seam of her lunchbox, tucked neatly under the lining where no one would notice. He tested it first. making sure it would pick up sound clearly. Then he slid it into place and zipped the lunchbox shut. Mia had no idea. She was too busy playing with her doll, her tiny fingers braiding its hair as she waited for him to finish. When it was time to leave, Caleb crouched down in front of her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Okay, baby girl, just like we talked about. Daddy put something special in your lunchbox, but it's a secret, okay?" Mia giggled. "Okay, Daddy." She had no idea the weight of what she was carrying. As Caleb drove her to school, his grip on the steering wheel was tight. His mind raced with all the possibilities. What if she was wrong? What if nothing happened? What if she was right? He pulled up to the school, watching as Mia hopped out of the car and ran toward the entrance, her tiny backpack bouncing with each step. He wanted to stay, wanted to march into that classroom and stare Mr. Johnson down, but he couldn't. Not yet. Instead, he went home and waited. The hours dragged by painfully slow. He tried to distract himself with work, but his mind kept drifting back to the recorder in Mia's lunchbox. What would it capture? Would it be enough? By the time the school day ended, Caleb was parked outside, waiting for Mia before the first wave of kids even stepped out. Finally, he saw her. Her curls bounced as she ran toward him, her backpack slung over her shoulders. She climbed into the car, kicking her feet excitedly. "Did you have a good day, baby?" Caleb asked, trying to sound normal. Mia nodded. "Mm-hmm." His eyes flickered to her lunchbox. He could see it poking out from her bag, just like every other day. He exhaled. "You hungry?" Mia shook her head. "No, Daddy. Mr. Johnson took it again." That confirmed it. Something was going on. Caleb clenched his jaw but kept his face neutral. "It's okay, baby. Let's go home." The drive back felt longer than usual. The second they walked through the door, Caleb grabbed her lunchbox, unzipped it, and pulled out the tiny recorder. His hands were steady, but his heart was pounding. He hit play, and what he heard next made his blood run cold. A low crackle filled the room as the recording began. Caleb sat at the kitchen table, his laptop open, earbuds plugged in. His hands curled into fists on the table as he listened. At first, it was just classroom noise. Kids chatting, chairs scraping, the faint murmur of Mr. Johnson's voice giving instructions. Normal. Then, the moment came. A soft rustling, the sound of a zipper, and then, his voice. "All right, let's see what we've got today." It was smooth, almost casual. Like this was routine, like he had done this 100 times before. A pause, more shuffling. "Peanut butter and jelly again? You always have the best lunches, Mia." Mia's tiny voice followed. "That's mine." "You don't need all this, sweetheart." A chuckle. "Little girls don't eat much, right? I'll take this today." Caleb's stomach twisted. Another pause, the sound of a juice box being lifted, a soft squeeze. I do love apple juice." Silence. Then Mia's voice, small, almost scared. "But I'm hungry." A deep breath from Mr. Johnson. Annoyance creeping in. "Mia, I told you, big people need it more. You'll be fine." And just like that, the recording ended. Caleb yanked the earbuds out so fast, they nearly tore from the jack. His hands were shaking. This wasn't some misunderstanding. This wasn't some harmless joke. This man, this teacher, was stealing food from his child every single day, dismissing her hunger, laughing about it. Caleb's chest rose and fell as he tried to keep his rage in check. This wasn't just about Mia anymore. If Mr. Johnson was doing this to her, who else had he done it to? Caleb looked at the recorder still clutched in his hand. This was proof. Solid, undeniable proof. And he knew exactly what he was going to do next. He was going to make sure everyone heard it. Caleb barely waited. The next morning, he was up before his alarm, the weight of the recorder in his pocket like a loaded gun. His mind was set. He was taking this straight to the principal. Mia was still asleep when he left, her curls sprawled over the pillow. He pressed a kiss to her forehead before walking out the door. By the time he pulled into the school parking lot, his hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. He could feel the anger simmering beneath his skin, but he forced himself to stay calm. He wasn't going to let emotions get in the way. Not yet. Inside, the school bustled with the usual morning routine. Teachers greeting students, parents chatting by the front desk. But Caleb had no time for small talk. He walked straight to the office, his jaw set. The The secretary barely had time to look up before he spoke. I need to speak with Principal Daniels, now. The woman blinked, taken aback by the firmness in his voice. Is there... It's urgent. Something in his eyes must have convinced her, because she hesitated only a moment before nodding. 1 second. Caleb stood rigid as she disappeared into the office. Seconds later, the door swung open, and Principal Daniels stepped out. A short woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense presence. Mr. Adams? She folded her arms. What's this about? Caleb didn't waste time. He pulled the recorder from his pocket, meeting her gaze. It's about my daughter, and Mayor Johnson. A flicker of something crossed her face. Confusion? Concern? It didn't matter. She motioned him into her office, shutting the door behind them. Caleb didn't bother sitting. Listen to this, he said, setting the recorder on her desk and pressing play. As the audio played, Principal Daniels' expression slowly shifted, from polite attentiveness to disbelief, then to something colder. Her lips pressed into a thin line as Mr. Johnson's voice filled the room. When it ended, silence hung between them. Caleb's voice was steady but firm. I want to know what you're going to do about this. Principal Daniels exhaled through her nose. Mr. Adams, this is shocking, to say the least. She pinched the bridge of her nose. I need to address this immediately. Damn right you do. She didn't scold him for the language. She was already reaching for the phone. I need Mr. Johnson in here, now. Caleb's jaw clenched. He wanted to see that man's face when he realized the game was up. Minutes later, the door opened again. And there he was. Mr. Johnson strolled in, completely unaware, a polite smile on his face. You wanted to see me, Principal. Then he saw Caleb. The smile faltered. Principal Daniels wasted no time. Sit down, Mr. Johnson. For the first time, Caleb saw something flicker in the teacher's expression. Not confusion, not concern, guilt. And that's when he knew. Mr. Johnson knew exactly what he'd done. For a moment, the room was silent. Mr. Johnson sat stiffly in the chair across from Principal Daniels, his hands folded neatly in his lap, but Caleb could see it, the way his fingers twitched, the slight shift in his breathing. He knew. Principal Daniels leaned forward, lacing her fingers together on the desk. Mayor Johnson, do you have anything to say for yourself before I play this recording? Mr. Johnson's smile was tight, forced. I'm not sure what this is about. Caleb scoffed, crossing his arms. You know exactly what this is about. Principal Daniels didn't give him another chance to stall. She pressed play, and this time, Mr. Johnson had to sit there and listen to himself. His voice filled the room again, casual, smug, the zipper, the rustling, his words as clear as day. All right, let's see what we've got today. Caleb didn't take his eyes off him. He watched as the teacher's face paled, as his throat bobbed with a hard swallow. By the time Mia's tiny voice said, "But I'm hungry," Mr. Johnson looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. The recording ended. Principal Daniels exhaled sharply. Well, her voice was tight, controlled. That's damning, to say the least. Mr. Johnson finally spoke, but his voice was different now, higher, defensive. Okay, look, it's not what it sounds like. Caleb barked out a bitter laugh. Oh, because it sounds like you've been stealing from my daughter, and God knows how many other kids. Mr. Johnson raised his hands. It's not like that. I was just trying to... He hesitated, searching for an excuse. Some of these kids waste food. I didn't want it to go to waste, that's all. Caleb's fists clenched. You think my 3-year-old wasted her food? Or were you just hungry? Mr. Johnson's mouth opened, but nothing came out. He had nothing. Principal Daniels stood. Mr. Johnson, I'm going to have to place you on immediate administrative leave while we conduct a full investigation. Mr. Johnson shot up from his chair. This is ridiculous. What's ridiculous, Caleb cut in, voice dangerously low, is that you've been taking food out of my kid's hands and treating it like a joke. The teacher's jaw clenched. Fine. Do your investigation, but I didn't do anything wrong. Caleb took a step forward, his eyes burning into him. Tell that to my daughter. Mr. Johnson didn't say another word. He just grabbed his things and left. Principal Daniels sighed, rubbing her temples. Mr. Adams, I want to assure you, this will be handled. I'll be reaching out to other parents as well to see if there are more cases like Mia's. Caleb exhaled. Good, because if you don't handle it, I will. And for the first time since he walked into the office that morning, he felt something shift. It wasn't over yet, but it would be, because now the truth was out. Caleb didn't tell Mia everything. She was only 3. She didn't need to carry the weight of what had happened. All she needed to know was that she'd never have to go hungry again. That night, as he tucked her into bed, she looked up at him with big, trusting eyes. "Mr. Johnson won't take my food anymore?" Caleb ran a hand over her curls, his voice soft. "No, baby, he won't." She smiled, satisfied, then rolled over and hugged her stuffed bunny. Within minutes, she was asleep. But for Caleb, it wasn't over. Over the next few weeks, more parents came forward. Other kids had mentioned their food going missing, but they had been brushed off until now. With the recording as undeniable proof, the school board had no choice. Mr. Johnson was fired, permanently banned from working with children again. It wasn't the justice Caleb had wanted, but it was the justice he could get. One afternoon, as he picked Mia up from school, she ran toward him with a big grin and something in her hands, her lunchbox, still full. She climbed into the car, wiggling excitedly in her seat. "Look, Daddy, I didn't eat all my food today." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "You weren't hungry?" Mia giggled. "I was, but I saved some for you." She opened the box, revealing half a sandwich and a few crackers. "You always make me good food, so I wanted to share." Caleb swallowed the lump in his throat. He smiled, taking a small bite of the sandwich. It was slightly squished from her backpack, but it was the best damn PB&J he'd ever had. He looked at his daughter, saw the jar, so innocent, so giving, so kind. Even after everything, she still had the heart to share. And at that moment, he made a silent promise to himself. He would always protect her, because no child should ever have to wonder if the people meant to care for them can actually be trusted. The people we trust with our children have an enormous responsibility, but trust should never be blind. If something feels off, ask questions, pay attention, listen, and most importantly, believe your child. Because sometimes the smallest voices tell the biggest truths.